Hello, and welcome back to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. My name is Cam, and for this upload, we will be reading Exodus chapter 14. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they turn and encamp before Pharaoh, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baalzephon, before it shall ye encamp by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, They are entangled in the land, the wilderness hath shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that he shall follow after them, and I will be honored upon Pharaoh and upon all his host, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. And it was told the king of Egypt that the people fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants was turned against the people. And they said, Why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? And he made ready his chariot, and took his people with him. And he took 600 chosen chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, and captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out with an high hand. But the Egyptians pursued after them all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them encamping by the sea, beside Phaharaoth, before Baalzephon. And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were sore afraid. And the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. And they said unto Moses, Because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, Let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. And Moses said unto the people, Fear ye not, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will shew to you today. For the Egyptians whom ye have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. And the Lord said unto Moses, Wherefore criest thou unto me? Speak unto the children of Israel, that they go forward. But lift thou up thy rod, and stretch out thine hand over the sea, and divide it, and the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And I, behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. And I will get me honor upon Pharaoh, and upon all his hosts, upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gotten me honor upon Pharaoh, upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen. And the angel of God, which went before the camp of Israel, removed, and went behind them. And the pillar of the cloud went from before their face, and stood behind them. And it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. And it was a cloud and darkness to them, but it gave light by night to these, so that the one came not near the other all the night. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. And the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued, and went in after them to the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to pass that in the morning watch the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to his strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it. And the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. And the waters returned, and covered the chariots, and the horsemen, and all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. But the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. And Israel saw that the great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord, and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. Summarizing Exodus chapter 14, God tells Moses to camp in the wilderness in front of the sea. Pharaoh will pursue them, thinking the Israelites have nowhere else to go. God says he will harden Pharaoh's heart so he can be glorified, and the Egyptians will know that he is Lord. In verse 5, once the Israelites left, Pharaoh and his servants changed their minds and regretted the decision to allow them to go. Pharaoh took 600 chosen chariots along with others to pursue the Israelites. Pharaoh found them in front of the sea. Immediately, the Israelites questioned Moses and God, asked why they were taken from Egypt. In verse 12, they tell Moses that it would have been better to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Why didn't you leave us alone? Let us serve the Egyptians. And in verse 13, Moses tells them to fear not and stand firm. See the salvation of the Lord. The Egyptians you see today, you will not see them again. The Lord will fight for you. You only have to be silent. In verse 15, the Lord asked Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the people to go forward. Lift your arms to divide it. Tell the Israelites to cross. The Egyptians will pursue you. In verse 19, the angel of God, manifested as a cloud pillar, stood behind the Israelites in between them and the Egyptians. Moses stretched his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove back the sea with the wind, dividing it into two walls of water and creating a path of dry land. The Israelites walked across the sea, and the Egyptians followed. The Lord troubled the wheels of the Egyptian chariots. The Egyptians then attempted to flee. Declaring that the Lord fights for the Israelites against the Egyptians, Moses stretched his hand over the water, and it returned, engulfing the Egyptians. The people of Israel walked on dry land, the waters being a wall on the right and the left. The Lord saved Israel from the Egyptians who were dead on the seashore. Israel saw the power of God, so then they feared the Lord. Some of the highlights for Exodus 14. After the Israelites leave Egypt, God leads them in the wilderness to rest in between the land and sea. And again, stubborn Pharaoh changed his mind, decided to pursue the Israelites. The next highlight, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. In chapter 14, verse 4, God says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. In chapter 14, verse 8, the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. In chapter 11, verse 10, the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. In chapter 10, verse 27, the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. In chapter 10, verse 20, the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. And in chapter 10, verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart. I ask if you watched the Exodus chapter 10 video to please disregard my assessment. I previously stated that God taking accountability for hardening Pharaoh's heart was not a direct action, but instead was an indirect disposition resulting from duality in creationism. I referenced Genesis chapter 1, and I made the statement that no choices can exist without multiple options. This is my personal belief, and that is an instance of me inserting my belief instead of just reading what the scripture says. As a Christian who believes the Bible and who wants other people to believe in the Bible, I have the habit of wanting this Christianity and God, Christian God, I want this to be as attractive to other people as it is for me. But that's not my role to make God attractive. Me existing in accordance to his values as a representative of Christ is enough. If God didn't write or have this story written to make himself seem more pleasing to his creation, I don't need to do this for him. The Lord God Almighty is the creator, the judge, the disciplinarian, the enforcer, and if needed, the executioner. How the Creator decides to manage and interact with his creation is up to him. God does not need to live up to our standard of godliness, justice, morality. God is law, and God is above the law. God does not owe us, his creation, an explanation for his actions. What this should do is make readers value the honesty in God's portrayal. He's not trying to make himself look a certain way to us. He's letting us know that he himself hardened Pharaoh's heart because he wanted an opportunity to display his glory. The next highlight: the Israelites immediately doubt God when the Egyptians arrive. In verse 12, they tell Moses it would have been better to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. This is after God performed multiple miracles, protected the Israelites from plagues that only the Egyptians were experiencing, physically manifested himself to lead them safely in the wilderness. And in chapter 13, verse 17, God even led the Israelites in an alternate route via the Red Sea to avoid opposition from the Philistines. He thought that might discourage them. God knew that one iota of opposition would deplete the faith of the Israelites. The Bible does not specifically say that the Israelites asked God to save them. In, chapter 14, verse 12, they tell Moses, "Didn't we tell you to leave us alone so we can just serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve them than to die out here in the wilderness." In Exodus chapter 1, verse 8 through 11, Pharaoh enslaved them because he feared their capacity and their number. And in chapter 2, verse 23 through 25, God heard their suffering and remembered his covenant with their forefathers, which is why he even intervened. Humans cannot have enough proof without needing more. In chapter 14, verse 31, Israel saw the great work that God did. So after the Egyptians were engulfed by the water, that's when the Israelites had fear for God. It says in the English Standard Version, Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians, so the people feared the Lord. In the New International Version, when the Israelites saw the mighty hand displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord. And then in the King James Version we just read, the Egyptians feared the Lord after. So it wasn't until after God solved their problem this time that they had fear, they had respect for God. In verse 15, God tells Moses to stretch his arms to divide the sea for the Israelites to walk through. God gets glory in solving human problems and gets glory as well from allowing a human to gain residual glory through association. Moses stretching out his arms and being the conduit to the miracles, it allows him to be the go-to trusted guy for leadership. It says in Exodus 11, verse 3, that Moses was respected among the Egyptians and by the Israelites. And that was said after all the plagues were performed or completed, except this was before the plague of the firstborn, where every firstborn Egyptian, male and of the cattle and of the children, were deceased. After all the plagues, but that one, Moses was respected, and that's because he was the conduit for these miracles to be performed. It says in chapter 14, verse 4, God says, I will be honored among the Egyptians, that they will know I am their Lord. And it says in chapter 14, verse 25, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. So God definitely got his glory. The Egyptians, before they were engulfed, declared that they recognized the Lord's power. Thank you for watching the video up until this point. The next upload will be Exodus chapter 15.